Today's video is lessons I've learned about urban cycling and bike commuting from 12 different cities around the world. Number 1, Montreal. Small changes build over time. I half jokingly say that Montreal is the city that radicalized me to cycling, but it's probably more accurate to say that Montreal is the city that stole my cycling heart. I was a bike commuter gearing up on a fast bike and squeezing into tight shorts to do battle on roads against cars on my way to work every day. And it really did feel like a battle. When I got to work, I feel like I had won, like I had accomplished something by surviving. But Montreal showed me that getting around by bike doesn't have to feel that way. Montreal, with its deeper connections to Europe, had been building bike lanes since the 1980s, at a time when most North American cities were still telling cyclists that they should just go faster and take the lane in front of moving automobiles. By the time of my first visit in the 2000s, there was a pretty good network of bike lanes in Montreal, and I had my first experience riding on safe, separated, concrete barrier-protected bike lanes. And it's no exaggeration to say that it changed my life. To see that a city could build in a way that makes it safe, easy, and calm to use a bike for transportation just made so much sense to me. I was hooked immediately. Since then, I've been lucky enough to visit Montreal pretty regularly every couple of years, and the thing that always strikes me is how that it gets better for bikes every time. Every time I visit, the city has expanded its network of bike lanes, it's improved connectivity, its bike share system has grown. And it's not just for bikes. The city has added summertime pedestrian streets, it's removed cars from parks, it's built pedestrian plazas and shared streets. Every visit, I feel the city is getting closer and closer to a proper balance between automobiles and every other user of our public space. And I think the key here, and this is something that was first pointed out to me by my friend and fellow YouTuber Paige Saunders, is that incremental change over time. Every year, a little bit of change seemed to happen, and over time, that change really adds up. This is the kind of change that's happening all over the city, taking space that was once dominated by the least efficient, least sustainable mode of transportation and sharing it with other modes. It's a reprioritization of space. Number 2, Paris. It's not about space, it's about priority. So if you're watching this channel, you're probably a bit of a city nerd like me, so you've probably heard something about the urbanist transformation of Paris over the past decade. Faster than pretty much any city that I've been to, it's transformed from famously car-clogged into a bike city. And it's a real bike city. This is rush hour traffic on a not very warm morning. And what struck me when I was riding through the city wasn't the pace of change or how quickly people switched from using whatever transportation mode they're using before to bikes. It was the use of space. And as part of this, they also found ways of opening up roundabouts to pedestrians. They added park space, and they've planted a huge number of new trees. And so how did they do this in a crowded old city? Well, they didn't nip and tuck space here and there. They reallocated it. Instead of always giving priority to cars, they just prioritized differently. Maybe the most famous example is on Rivoli, one of Paris's high streets. The space here was once basically all given over to cars. Now it's mostly for bikes, with just one lane reserved for taxis, buses, and delivery vehicles. There's still a bunch of roads parallel to this where you can drive, but this one was just prioritized differently. And riding down it now is just magical, and it really is a microcosm of change in the whole city that shows that you can really do amazing things if you just rethink the use of that space. Number 3, political courage. Now, I wouldn't call New York a cycling city quite yet, but if you think back to before the Bloomberg administration, the change that's happened in the city is pretty remarkable. From bike lane construction to the city's bike share program becoming part of the city's identity to more recently, the implementation of congestion pricing. What I took note of through all of this is the importance of political courage. Making changes like this in every city is tough because it's not just about, say, like realigning the street to include a bike lane. It's also about a fight over the status quo. It's a change to a paradigm that we've built over the past 75 years. And really, it's forcing people to rethink something that had become so ingrained that they may have never even thought about it before. So in most cities, it's a political fight, but it's safe to say that most cities, the political fights aren't quite as messy as they are in New York. New York is the media capital of the US, so everything is amplified. So the fact that leaders over the years have invested their political capital in projects to improve cycling and pedestrianism is pretty remarkable. It really shows how important political will is in trying to improve our cities. The debate over congestion pricing is just a perfect example of this. It had been debated for decades. Finally, a plan was in place, and that plan was scuttled at the 11th hour because of politics. But then just as suddenly, it was revived and implemented while critics lost their minds. And now, a year later, it pretty much did everything that it was supposed to do. Traffic volumes are down, traffic moves more smoothly and consistently, transit and bike use is up, And as Doug Gordon from the War on Cars pointed out to me when I visited a few weeks ago, the city is quieter. And none of that would have happened without the political will to make change. Number 4, London. The benefits are bigger than transportation. London is another city that's slowly gotten better for cycling, from its now kind of famous cycling superhighways to some really well-placed routes that are pretty cool to ride on. That route along the Thames on your bike towards Parliament is pretty special. But what's really interesting about the growth of cycling in London, however, is how it's brought so many other positive changes as well. In London, the evidence shows that roads with separated bike lanes are safer for cyclists, and in many cases, they're safer for motorists as well, because speeds are reduced and the streets are just calmer. In many districts, bike lanes have also increased business because it's easier to get in and out of a shop when you're on a bike than it is on a car searching for a car parking. But the thing that struck me most of all was about air quality. Along with its low emission zones and restricting automobile traffic, adding bike lanes has had a pretty remarkable impact on air quality in London. In central London over the past 20 years, there has been a 53% drop in harmful nitrogen dioxide levels. London isn't the only place where this has happened. You may have seen these maps from Paris that show the improvement in air quality over time as cycling and pedestrianism grew. The point here is that cycling isn't just for those whiny cyclists who are always complaining about bike lanes. Cycling improves the city for everybody in so many ways. Number 5, Edmonton. Building better cities can happen anywhere. I can hear you asking already, what the heck is Edmonton? Well, it's a city near where I live. It's the provincial capital here in Alberta, Canada, and one of the most northerly capitals in the world. It's also similar to many post-war North American cities in that it's a bit sprawling. It was built with big wide roads during the era when we thought we ought to be able to drive our car anywhere at any time and have ample free parking, before we realized that this is a terrible idea that threw hundreds of years of tradition and human ingenuity in building cities aside in favor of an unsustainable model that is making our cities worse in so many ways. In other words, it's exactly the kind of place that you might expect to be reluctant to go back to embracing the traditions of building cities for people instead of just for cars. But that's not what's happening in Edmonton. Over the last decade, the city has been among North America's leaders in trying to undo some of the damage of car-centric planning. The city has been a leader in rethinking things like parking minimums, zoning reform, and cooperative planning. It has also made a big investment in cycling, and all of this is starting to pay off. Not only does the city still have some of the most affordable housing prices in the country, thanks at least partly to these planning decisions, it's also been making strides in building bike lanes, improving transit, and building better public spaces. Yes, it's got a long way to go, but the work is happening, and I'd say the progress it's making shows that if change can happen here, it can probably happen in your city too. Number 6, Seattle. Thinking creatively about the space in your city. The US city of Seattle is rainy, it's hilly, it's cloudy, and yet it often ranks among the top American cities for cycling. And I'm going out on a limb here and saying that this bike route right here is at least part of the reason for that. This is the Burke-Gilman Trail, a beloved bike and pedestrian route that's been around for decades. And it really enables people on foot and bike to cut through some of the core areas of the city and gets you maybe not quite downtown, but to a lot of the important places in the city. Well, why does that matter? Well, what struck me about this route was how it came about. Well, this route was once a railroad, but when the rail route was decommissioned in the 1970s, the land just kind of sat around for years while people debated what to do with this space. The easy answer would have been to carve it up and sell it off, and maybe some adjacent landowners would have scored themselves an extra big backyard. But what emerged was groundbreaking for the time and has had a huge impact. It was transformed into a trail and became one of the first rail trails in the world. There are now thousands of rail trails all over the globe. Today, I'd say that rail trails are not always considered best practice for cycling infrastructure. Bike lanes tend to have the biggest impact when they take cyclists through busy retail areas or through denser environments where they can facilitate city transportation and economic growth without expanding car infrastructure. But what's remarkable about this project is the vision to see this land use as something different, and that people had the creativity and forethought to see it become a public amenity that is now beloved by millions of people and has had a huge impact on their daily lives. And to see this forgotten, overlooked space as something that could help transform a city, I think that's the real lesson of Seattle. Number 7, Oulu, Finland. You can build winter cycling cities. Way up in northern Finland, north of the Baltic Sea, but just a bit south of the Arctic Circle, is a city called Oulu, Finland. For much of the year, it's snowy and cold and dark, and it also happens to be one of the best bike cities in the world. Here, there is a network of separate bike routes that gets you almost anywhere you need to go in the city. In the transportation network, these routes are often prioritized before roads built for cars. They are well lit to account for the short winter days, and perhaps more importantly, they're well maintained in the winter. Here, the plow crews work hard to keep a nice foundation of snowpack that offers great traction on a bike. The result is that thousands of people use a bike for transportation, even in the winter months. And it's not just those crazy hardcore cyclists either. We're talking about moms and kids, grandparents, office workers, and students on their way to school. Oulu is proof that you don't need to have the perfect climate to have a great bike city. You just have to commit to building it. Number 8, Ottawa and Washington. Cycling progress is local, not national. Ottawa, Canada, and Washington, D.C. have a lot in common on paper. Both are national capitals. Both have iconic landmarks and institutions that are central to their country's sense of itself. Both have a little bit of extra investment because of their capital status. Governments tend to want to showcase their capital cities. But in riding a bike through both of these cities, it kind of upended some of my assumptions about these cities and about the nature of cycling in cities itself. Here's what I assumed going in: that Ottawa, the capital of Canada, was going to be the more progressive cycling city, but it wasn't. Riding around Washington, I was genuinely surprised by how bikeable it is. It's got a solid network of on-street bike lanes, decent transit, and some really walkable, livable neighborhoods. The National Mall area in particular was really amazing on a bike. Ottawa, by contrast, felt like a pretty typical mid-sized North American city. There are some genuinely beautiful routes along the Rideau Canal and behind Parliament along the Ottawa River, for example. But outside of those scenic corridors, the network is pretty patchy and incomplete in a way that felt pretty frustrating. So what does this tell us? Well, I kind of went into this thinking that it would be a reflection of each country's national character, but I'm not sure this tells us anything about national character or political culture. And I came around to this idea that that's actually the point. Maybe cycling isn't national at all. Maybe it's local. I mean, yes, national cycling strategies and federal funding can supercharge things, but maybe identity politics or silly culture wars over cycling is not as important as the boring stuff of city building. The specific decisions made by city councils, specific advocates who showed up at the right meeting at the right moment, where someone had the political courage or they did not to reallocate some road space. Washington got better for bikes because of choices made mostly at the city level. Ottawa's gaps aren't a Canadian failure, they're an Ottawa challenge. Which, when you think about it, is actually good news. You don't have to change a whole country to make a city better for cycling. You just have to make some small changes in your city. 9, Victoria. You can build a family bike city. Victoria is another Canadian city you may have not heard of because it's usually in the shadow of its big sister across the Georgia Strait, Vancouver. Victoria has a bit of a reputation of being kind of a sleepy government town, which is not entirely deserved, but well, maybe a little. But it's also a pretty good bike city. And what strikes me whenever I visit there is that it's a bike city in a slightly different way than most other cities, especially in North America. And what it does is it shows that you can build a bike city not around commuters, but around families. I first started thinking this because every time I'm in the city, I'm struck by how many cargo bikes I would see. Everywhere I turned, I would see parents riding their kids around. I'd see cargo bikes being ridden for deliveries, and sometimes just people out for a ride on a cargo bike with no cargo at all. The city has been pretty intentional in recent years in building beyond just bike commuting. Most cities tend to focus on, let's just say it, upper middle class white dudes with beards getting to work every day. But Victoria has, in recent years, started consciously moving beyond that. They're really focused on what is sometimes called the mobilities of care. This refers to all those trips that are done in a city that are basically everything outside of work. It's the unpaid travel associated with domestic responsibilities like shopping or school runs or caring for children or even older adults. When it comes to cycling, this means enabling bike trips not just to downtown employment centers, but to daycares, schools, grocery stores, and recreation centers. Victoria is doing this. Some of the greenways in the residential areas are great at this. And riding your bike with your kids is so much better than being stuck in traffic with them strapped in the back seat anyway. I also think a bike culture like this calms the bike lanes down a bit because they're filled with bigger, slower moving vehicles and they're filled with kids. I know this is happening in other cities, but Victoria is the place where I've seen it coming to life the most. 10, Berlin and Hamburg. Normalizing cycling isn't enough. I was lucky enough a couple of years ago to spend some time in Germany riding bikes in a couple of different cities. And while I was very impressed with the number of people I saw using a bike to get around the city, there was something that wasn't sitting quite right with me that I just couldn't quite put my finger on. Until I talked to this German bike advocate who said something that stuck with me ever since. He said cycling in Germany is normalized, but marginalized. Well, he said that in many parts of Germany, using a bicycle to get to work around the city is quite normal. If you show up in your bike gear in most North American workplaces, You're different. People will notice. That doesn't really happen in Germany because so many people are doing it. But when you're riding a bike on many German streets, you're just not prioritized. It's the cars that are still being given priority. This advocate said that in infrastructure, in planning decisions, and even in law, the automobile is still king. And that really limits the potential of cycling. It means it's not as safe, it's not as common, and it's not as impactful on our lives as it could be. I often think that one of the problems with cycling in North America is that it's not mainstream enough. We need a culture of cycling to really break through. But I think this phrase normalized but marginalized showed me that that is not enough. Yes, we want to normalize cycling, but we also need it to be prioritized. 11, Calgary. Build on what you have. I saved my city for the final point here. I live in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, a city of about 1.5 million people, and I don't think many people, including myself, would describe it as a bike city. Yes, we've made some progress. We've got a decent network of bike lanes. We have a good light rail system that makes for some good multimodal commutes, but we're still pretty much a car city. However, I think Calgary is also a great example of how you can make a city better for cycling by building on what you have. By a quirk of history and thanks to the vision of a few key people over the last 50 years, Calgary has a pretty great multi-use pathway network. It was envisioned in the 1970s as a recreational amenity, and as a low-density city with tons of space, we're lucky that this idea was institutionalized to the point where pathways are now just an integral part of all of the ways that the city grows. The result is that as the city has sprawled and sprawled, we've continued to build a pretty great network of multi-use pathways. We like to brag that it's the biggest multi-use pathway network in North America, although I'm not sure that's actually true, but who am I to argue with the self-mythologizing that we do in our cities? What this network was never really intended for was transportation. It's not built to efficiently get you from your home in the suburbs to your office downtown. It's built for lovely Sunday rides on curvy routes through river valleys and parks. But over the years, and at a pace much slower than I would like, we've started to integrate this great recreational pathway network into a more efficient transportation network for active mobility. By making connections between these pathways and a small network of on-street bikeways, we're slowly building out a properly functioning transportation network. We still have some absurd gaps in this network, places where the pathway network and the bikeway network are very close, but we're just missing key links between them. But I think this shows that a city can build with what it's already got. Amenities built for recreation can make a difference. You can enhance what's already there as long as you do it thoughtfully and commit to it. Okay, that's it. I look forward to exploring more cities and learning more about urban cycling, and I'll be sure to share all of that with you. That's the whole point of this channel. If you've got lessons from other cities, don't be shy, share them down below. Thanks to Shifter members and sponsors for your support, and I'll see you next time.